This is section 2.6 of AP Microeconomics. Let's get started. So we've previously talked about supply models and demand models, but now we're going to put them together on one graph. So as you can see here, we have our supply upward sloping, demand downward sloping, price vertical axis, quantity horizontal axis, and then the equilibrium point. So where these two intersect is called equilibrium. Now, what does that mean when you're at market equilibrium? It means that the quantity demanded at that given price is equal to quantity supplied. So that means there's no shortages, there's no surpluses. Everybody's happy. So let's look at an example of something. If I gave you this table and I said, so this is the market for boxes of pasta. What is the equilibrium price and quantity? And then to graph it. Well, by looking at this table, we would look at where the total quantity demanded equals total quantity supplied. You got to be careful with this because sometimes they won't give you the market. They'll break it down by individual consumer or individual supplier, and then you got to add them up to get the market. But here they gave you the market total. Since quantity demanded equals quantity supplied at $1.50, that's what it looks like. All right. Now, you need to know the four shifts. This is something you really need to practice and understand how price and quantity change with each shift. So here, demand increases. When demand increases, price goes up, quantity goes up. When demand decreases, price goes down, quantity goes down. Notice that when there's a shift in demand, price and quantity move in the same direction. With supply, price and quantity move in opposite directions. So when supply increases, you have more quantity, but price falls. That makes sense. There's more supply of something, more available. That means it's less scarce, so it's less valuable. When supply decreases, price goes up and quantity goes down. Right? So here's some examples to practice. I won't go through each one of these, but I'll pick maybe two. Always, always, always define your market before you do a shift. You have to know which market you're talking about because they can bring up multiple products in a given problem. So this is the bagel market. Every example here will be the bagel market, all right? So let's just look at this one. A recent study suggests eating bagels contributes to excessive weight gain. Well, I would say that's a taste and preferences, but on the negative side. That's not good. So demand would shift left. When demand shifts left, okay, price falls, quantity falls. What about the price of yeast? Well, that's an input. It says here it's a primary component to make bagels. If that's an input, that means your input costs are falling. When your input costs are falling, supply increases. When supply increases, quantity increases, price falls. Okay. What about the price of a substitute going up? Well, if the price of muffins are going to go up, people are going to buy less muffins, so quantity demanded for muffins will fall, but the demand for bagels will increase. All right. So demand would increase, price goes up, quantity goes up. What about this one? You say, well, wait a minute, there's no shift here. Nope. Because what is the only thing that cannot shift a graph? The price of that product. That's why you have to know what market you're talking about. So if we're talking about the bagel market, the price of bagels cannot shift the graph. It's on the vertical axis. It can't shift it. So what that means, though, is that the price of bagels is falling. What does happen? It means when price falls, let's think about law of supply and demand, that means quantity demanded would go up. See, it's cheaper, so quantity demand goes up, but quantity supplied would fall. When price falls, quantity supplied falls. And in this case, what would happen is that since there's no shift and price is just falling, when quantity demanded is greater than quantity supplied, would that be a surplus or a shortage? No, that would be a shortage. All right. So that's not a good price in this market. More companies are exiting the bagel market. So that means that number of sellers, and they're leaving, so it's falling, which means price goes up, quantity goes down. Okay. And one thing to note, that any change in demand does affect the price. Thus, it affects quantity supplied. Okay. Anything that affects demand will affect quantity supplied. Anything that changes supply will affect quantity demanded. I mean, that's how you move that. That's how you get those to move. It's not just the price, but what affects the price? Well, the shift in the other graph. All right. So if demand, like here, supply is decreasing. Well, look, that's also a movement along the demand curve. When supply decreases, price goes up. When price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. That's what I mean when I say this. Okay. The last thing I'll talk about is consumer and producer surplus. So consumer surplus is just the difference between what a buyer is willing to pay and what they actually pay. So if I paid $10 for a pizza today, I was willing to pay 12, my consumer surplus was 2. If Domino's was willing to sell me that pizza for 5, but they sold it to me for 10, their producer surplus would be 5, and we'd both win. So it's just a difference between a maximum and what you did, and then a minimum what you got for it. All right. So here's some examples. Don't need to go through all of these, but you could look at some. If a candy bar cost $1.50, Grayson would have paid $4. What is his consumer surplus? Again, he paid $1.50, but he would have paid $4, so that means $2.50. And each of these consumers have their own consumer surplus. But what is the total consumer surplus in the market? Add up all the consumer surpluses, and you'd get $5. And the same thing would go for producer surplus. Add up all the producers' surpluses, and you get a producer surplus. Total economic surplus is combining both producer surplus and consumer. Now, in a market with 1 million people, this would take forever to do. So an easier way to do it is if you had a graph, just take the area under this curve. Remember, what is a demand curve? A demand curve shows the most a consumer would be willing to pay at a given price. This is what he did pay. So this whole area is consumer surplus. Producer surplus is the difference between what the producer sold it for and the minimum they would have sold it for. That's what a supply curve is. It's the minimum price they would sell it for. So the difference there is producer surplus. Allocative efficiency is a very important term. It's going to be more important next unit, but for now I'm introducing it. It is simply the point where the marginal benefit of producing something is equal to the marginal cost. This is also called socially optimal. You're doing what's best for society. It means you're not wasting any resources at all. There's only one allocative efficient point on any graph, okay? There's something called dead weight loss. We'll get to that later, but you don't want dead weight loss. So here you have maximized your surplus. That's what you need to know. Okay. Here's an example. You can crunch the numbers yourself. Here's what they add up to. Keep in mind it's in millions. All right. And then that's it for this section. Hope that was helpful.